This episode of Judaism Unbound is brought to you in partnership with the podcast All About Change.
Change starts with listening.
If you have a heart, activism is just a natural step into the next part of who you're going to be as a person.
But how do you turn that feeling into meaningful action?
Don't try to fight bad legislation. Write your own legislation.
On All About Change, we talk to inspiring people about their purpose, what gives them hope and drives them to create change. So join us. Find stories that fuel your own journey. Listen to All About Change wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 516. Jewish music is Jewish text. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today, we're returning to the topic that we did a series of episodes about not too long ago, Jewish music, with our guest today, Anthony Russell, who works primarily in the medium of Yiddish language and culture. In our series on Jewish music, we spoke with a variety of musicians, prayer leaders, songwriters, and an ethnomusicologist about the power Jewish music has in shaping and transforming Jewish communities. Today, we'll continue the exploration, asking what the phrase Jewish music even means, why music has proven to be influential for so long, and some of the distinctions between forms of music that engage us in different ways. But before we dive into the conversation, Lex, do we have any Judaism unbouncements this week?
We do indeed. First Judaism Unbouncement. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2026. It's a joy to be entering a new year. We hope that this year is full of Jewish learning and unlearning, whether through us or many other Jewish organizations in the world. We cannot wait to experience it with you. Also, on that front, very, very soon, in mid-January, so as this episode is being released, about 10 days away, but if you're listening after the initial release date, then it could be even sooner, we have 3-week mini courses in the Anya Shiva beginning, our digital center for Jewish learning and unlearning. You can learn more about them at judaismunbound.com/classes. We have 4 awesome options that you can choose from. There's Brit Milah Unbound, exploring circumcision, Queering Kedusha, that's holiness through Jewish craftways, Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism, and the Torah of Kink. So again, judaismunbound.com/classes to learn more or register, and financial aid is available via any of the registration pages for any of these classes. Just click the link and fill out the application for aid, and we will grant that. With that, Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Lex. Now, here's a bit more about our guest today, Anthony Russell. Anthony Russell is a returning guest. He was our guest back on episode 367 when we talked about the organization Let My People Sing. Anthony Russell is a multidisciplinary artist working in the medium of Yiddish language and culture. Some of his recent musical projects include the collaborations Convergence, which creates a repertoire of songs authentically inhabiting the sounds and histories of 2 diasporic traditions, African American spirituals and the music of Jewish Eastern Europe, and Yiddish Meets Ladino. Anthony Russell has been a fellow with Hadar's Rising Song Institute, American Jewish University's Public Fellows Program, and the Mandel Institute's Cultural Leadership Fellowship. He's also the Mitchell J. Gerstein Distinguished Visiting Artist in Residence at the University of Toronto. Beyond performance, Anthony Russell has expanded his work into cultural activism through collaboration with the Worker Circle and as an essayist in a number of publications including The Forward, Tablet, Moment Magazine, JTA, Protocols, Ayin Press, and Jewish Currents. Anthony Russell, welcome back to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
I wanted to start with your own history of getting into Jewish music. I mean, how does one become a Yiddish performer or musician in our time?
It's a very complicated story. It's not the kind of thing that, just happens. I didn't just fall out of the tree and become, performer of Yiddish Kunstlieder, of a Yiddish art song. The way in which I came to this particular kind of music was I was an opera singer. I had a number of unfortunate experiences as an opera singer, racism, homophobia, and any number of lovely things I no longer have any desire to have to deal with. And at that particular point, I decided to give up singing because it had been such a traumatic experience for me working in opera. But subsequently, I was asked to do some singing for High Holidays, which I did. And the response from the congregation was so intense and sort of profound that I began to think, well, perhaps I should try to figure out how to be a singer within the confines of Jewish music. This is really funny now that I think about it, because some years before, my husband had said to me, I know you're into this whole opera thing and that's great, but I think if you ever decided to perform Jewish music, people would love that. And I remember saying, when I need your opinion about what I'm going to do with my life professionally, I will ask you. But until then, please, mind your own business, Rabbi Rothbaum. I was very I was on the highest horse, right? Of course, some years later, I'm like, oh goodness, I'm in the desert, wandering around, being like, okay, how am I going to sort of exist as a singer? What music am I going to find that really sort of defines me and my voice and who I am? And I had remembered, again, some years before, I had seen the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man, and I had heard this deep, rich, beautiful, operatic bass voice singing in Yiddish on the soundtrack. And I remember at the time thinking oh, that was just Paul Robeson, because it sounded like Paul Robeson. And I knew that Paul Robeson had some Yiddish songs in his repertoire. But after doing some digging, I found out that it was a singer by the name of Sidor Belarski, who, like myself, was a bass and a former opera singer. He was born in what is now Ukraine at the end of the 19th century. And he performed Yiddish Kunstlieder, Yiddish art song, all over the world, through basically the 1960s, had an immense discography. And in that discography, I found, in a word, myself. I found a repertoire that seemed suited to me as a musical interpreter, to my voice, to my abilities. And as they say, the rest is history. That was in the fall of 2011. I was living in upstate New York, which is a great place to begin a career as a Yiddish singer, by the way. Basically in the Catskills.
Basically, because you're a bass. Hey,
So yeah, I found this music, and what's really sort of complicated, not complicated for me because it's just sort of coming from me, it's emanating out of me, but I think complicated for portions of my audience, is that I was specifically looking for music in which I could embody the spiritual and emotional and sort of metaphysical contents of my life as a Black, queer, Jewish person, right? So I know there's somebody who's listening to this right now and they're just like, okay, so you found that in Yiddish art song? And I want to say yes, I did. And I've been finding it in Yiddish art song for almost 13 years now. When I get up and I sing these songs, which invariably are about some aspect of what it is to be Jewish, specifically Ashkenazi Jewish, usually in the late 19th and first half of the 20th century, I am singing them as a representation of myself. I'm singing them not as if I am, the poor yeshiva student in Lithuania circa 1898. I am the poor yeshiva student in Lithuania in 1898 when I am singing that song. I am using that song as a tool to explore the interpretive and emotional contents of my life. This music has really given me the ability to embody emotional, cultural space in a way that almost no other music has allowed me to do. Because as an opera singer, especially as a bass, there's only so many kinds of roles that you can perform, right? You're usually a villain, or you're a buffoon, or you're the soprano's father, or you're God. Great.
I just want all our listeners to notice villain, buffoon, soprano's father, God. There's a tech study in there about those four things for our listeners to sit with.
It is giving some sort of like archetypes, right? Like these are the four choices that you have to be in the world. No.
The four children at Passover. The four genders. I don't know.
I want to say, like, in order to embody what it is performatively to be within the confines of a Yiddish art song, the only thing you have to be is a Jew. And even if you're not Jewish, when you're singing that art song, that Yiddish art song, you are performing a way of being Jewish in the world. And that was something that I felt like I could authentically bring to performing this music in Yiddish.
Yeah, I'm interested in the question of like Yiddish music as, for certain kinds of Jews and ages of Jews, very central and very much what comes to mind when they think Jewish music. And for other ages and backgrounds of Jews, like less so. And I've talked about this in this unit on Jewish music. When I go to different Jewish settings, I think it's my job as somebody who's leading music in those spaces regularly to have a sense of like, what are some of the different anthems? Like, what is something that I can sing with them that it is likely that room will be excited about, and then I can bring the other things that they don't know as much, but I've gotten them aboard. And when I go to Jewish old age homes, I tend to start very early with Tum Balalaika, which is a classic go-to Yiddish song. I mean, there's words in English, there's words in Yiddish, but like originally it's a Yiddish language song. And what tends to happen is they say to me afterwards, like, somebody your age knows that song. Like, I love that you led that. And I by the way, I also like then bring in Irving Berlin. That opens up like conversations about what Jewish music is, and he's a Jew, but he didn't just write Jewish music. But like, right. Those are two of the angles that I tend to start with. And I think both pull on their heartstrings and their Jewish heartstrings. I think that if I started a performance or a communal singing situation with certain groups of Jews, and my first lead was a Yiddish language song, like a Tum Balalaika or otherwise, it's not that it would necessarily be bad, but I don't know that it would have the same impact on them. And so I guess I'm curious, can you help us sort through Yiddish music as, in certain ways, central to this category Jewish music that we've been asking about and problematizing throughout this unit, and in other ways, actually kind of on the margins for certain groups of Jews who may have been shaped by societies that were ashamed of Yiddish, that it's seen as like a coarse and unrefined language. And so a lot of our communities growing up had Jewish music that was not focused on Yiddish. So like that's like less of a specific question than a stew of thoughts. But it feels like the question of where Yiddish music fits into our Jewish lives can help us sort out some bigger questions about who we are as Jews and what Jewish music is.
Coarse and unrefined. Can we talk about that for a hot second?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yiddish is like any other language that exists in the world in the sense that there are any number of registers and kinds of ways of expressing oneself in the language. There is extremely erudite and high-flown versions of the language. There's great poetry in the language. There are novels in the language. There are plays in the language. There's everything you could possibly think of. And then there is, the book of curse words that you find in every dusty and shuttered synagogue bookstore that you ever encounter, right? There are things that exist on both of these extremes. I will tell you that most of the Yiddish that I work with is on the first one. I'm really grateful to you that you sing Tum Balalaika for people, because I generally don't sing all of the songs that everybody knows. To a certain extent, this is aggravating for a lot of people. I don't know, if I can be completely honest, it's kind of like, okay, so you're this Black guy and you sing in Yiddish and you don't sing the songs that I know, like, what the hell are you doing here? And there's a very specific reason as to why I do that, and I don't think it's, or why I don't do that. A lot of my work is animated by the concept of the Jewish artist as a dynamic, creative, and even prophetic element within Jewish life, within Jewish community. That being the case, I have a very complicated relationship with what I would like to do and how I decide to sort of articulate myself as a Jewish artist and what the needs of a community are, which I believe are two very different things. So very often what I will do, I will oftentimes not perform the most popular
Yeah. Yeah.
songs that happen in the Yiddish language, which means that there has been 13 years of disappointment that has followed me around. I feel very strongly that as an artist, that as a performer, I should only perform songs that I feel a very deep emotional and spiritual connection with. And I will tell you, a lot of those songs do not tend to be bangers in the most popular sense of the word, right?
Kind of sounds like a Yiddish word. Banger for banging.
They're not bangers. I mean, some of them are bangers, but a lot of the music, a lot of the repertoire that I'm the most attracted to is music that engages a place of pain and of hurt and of alienation and trauma and deep spirituality. Coming from a tradition in which there are music that does these same things, for me specifically, music coming out of the African American spiritual tradition, I feel like I found a parallel sort of world in which these very complicated feelings are expressed in Yiddish art song. So sometimes it's very hard to make my case to your regular Jew in the pew as to why I'm not singing Tum Balalaika, or I'm not singing Oifen Pripachek, or I'm not singing Hanukkah or Hanukkah, which is a shame because like I feel bad, you know. People are like, "Oh, you're a singer. Oh, you sing in Yiddish, you know, singing Hanukkah or Hanukkah," and I'm like, I don't actually know Hanukkah, but I do know this very meaningful and very sad song called Oy Ihr Kleine Lichtelech. I really want you to understand that what you're doing when you sing Tum Balalaika and what I am doing when I sing O Ihr Kleine Lichtelech or any of the other songs that I sing in my repertoire are on a continuum. Music in the Yiddish language exists out in the world, but more meaningfully, it exists literally within the bodies and the souls of the people who are familiar with it, the people who come from this tradition, the people who have this as a part of their Yerusha, right? This is part of their background. When you go to the old folks' home and you fire up Tum Balalaika, you are activating some aspect of these people's lives, which allows you to be able to connect with them on such a deep level that it really is unparalleled. That's why people respond to you. I have comparable experiences where I perform the music that I perform, and in some very deep and meaningful way, I'm able to engage with some part of who my audience is, where my audience has been. There's something alchemical happening. Even now, like talking about it, I'm just very like 8 o'clock in the morning here in San Diego, California. I'm like about to cry, but it's like a very moving experience because there's so much history and there's so much meaning wrapped up in this language and in this culture. Anyone's ability to be able to connect with that really does create something alchemical in the room. I don't know. Has this been your experience, Lex, with Tum Balalaika? This is probably the most I've ever spent talking about Tum Balalaika.
It has. I didn't mean to suggest that I don't think it's important what I'm doing. Like I appreciate the gorgeous reflection you just gave, but yes, absolutely, that's my experience. And the Irving Berlin response to me singing Blue Skies, which is, I mean, I bring up him because he famously wrote a lot of Christmas songs. He also pulls on the heartstrings as well, which I think helps us notice.
For me, like I have a maximalist sense of what the relationship is between these things. Irving Berlin, right? Coming from a family of cantors.
Mhm.
So like it's not an accident, one, that he's a musician because he has, you know, music as a part of his Yerusha, as a part of his background. It's a very like complicated history in the end of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, even beyond that, kind of the relationship between Jewish musicians and American popular genres. It often involves appropriation, capitalization, any number of, you know, issues. But I think there's something there. For me, there is a relationship between Timbalalaika and Irving Berlin. There, I mean, specifically with Blue Skies, I'm not going to try to do it at 8 o'clock in the morning, but like there are some melodic tendencies towards Ashkenazi Jewish music in that song itself. And this has been elucidated by any number of musicologists, you know, trying to figure out, okay, what are kind of the little points of Jewishness, the Pintelayid, as it were, in the work of Irving Berlin. Jewish music is not defined by what it is not. It is not defined by some abstract sense of Jewish purity having nothing to do with anything around it, but rather the ways in which Jewish music is influenced and influences the music and the culture of the peoples who are immediately around it. Jewish music from North Africa sounds North African and is filled with communal relationship that North African Jews had with their co-territorial peoples. And Ashkenazi Jewish music from Central and Eastern Europe is exactly the same. It has qualities of what this relationship was between these groups of people, at least culturally. Music, in the context of what it is to be Jewish and what Jews have really given the world, always receives such short shrift, as if music itself was not a text. Music is a text. Music has so much to say. Music tells us a lot about the values and the meaning and the spirituality of the people who created it, fostered it, and transmitted it to future generations. Case in point, Kol Nidre, okay?
Alexa's favorite topic.
It is, and it's come up a lot in this unit, which I think is, I was going to say remarkable, but in the sense of able to be remarked, not like that surprising.
This is my prime example. If you could manage to get a kind of Jew in shul for anything, chances are you could probably get them in shul for Kol Nidre. Let me ask you, knowing about the textual contents of Kol Nidre, that is what the text is actually saying, do you think that's the reason why people are showing up to shul on Kol Nidre?
My answer is that the title of my undergrad thesis on this topic was More Than Words on a Page.
Obviously.
I very much think the answer is no. It is not about the text of nullifying vows and oaths.
It's pretty legalistic. But what's interesting is that one year when I was davening Kol Nidre, I sat down and I wrote a literal translation into my score. So I would have an idea really what I was singing, and also interpretively try to figure out, like, how was I going to vary what I was singing as I was singing these very specific kinds of vows. I am going to get a little like Kabbalistic woo-woo here. I'm just going to mark that right now. It's generally not my vibe, but hang with me here. So in Kol Nidre, you have this text which specifically talks about the nullification of vows. And as I said, it's a kind of very legalistic text. It's the kind of text where if you were sent it by email, it would be in PDF, and there'd be a place at the bottom where you'd click and you'd sign your name, and either you'd literally sign your name or there'd be that kind of fake signature that you can click on and it automatically goes into the document, and then you send it back, right?
Yep.
That is the text of Kol Nidre. But the melody of Kol Nidre is something completely different. It, in some way, creates a spiritual world beneath the words. What are the spiritual implications of having one's vows nullified before an entire congregation? What are the implications of having one person be the one who, at least initially, leads that recitation of nullification. Like, what position, not just musically, but almost like spiritually and ritually, is that person embodying by singing Kol Nidre? Does that position reside within the words, or does it reside within the melody? I think it resides within the melody. I think the melody does so much more work towards this kind of spiritual nullification than the words do. The melody itself has meaning. Obviously it does, because people show up every year to hear it. It's obviously doing something. Synagogues are not full of comprehensive, Aramaic speakers. It's the melody that really is defining their experience of what it is to come to tshuva, to repentance, through the act of Yom Kippur.
So this is actually making me think a lot about an experience that I had over the summer where I saw a performance of like great music from opera. And it was one of those times when it was like the words were projected on the screen. And it was like opera music that I mostly didn't know, but every once in a while there's one that I know. And I remember I think it's from Carmen, the famous tune from Carmen. And it's like the words were like, you have to pay our wages or whatever. And I was like, that's what this is about. And I was like, this is so kind of mundane. And I was like, I kind of wish I didn't know what this was about. And in a way, it's similar to Kol Nidre, where you're really there for the tune. And it turns out that not only are you not there for the words, but if you find out what the words are, it actually kind of puts you off a little bit. And so I'm thinking about this more broadly as a question about the audience for music, as opposed to, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about, which is the performer's view of the music. And I'm curious about how those two come together. I'm thinking about, the recent death of Rob Reiner of blessed memory, and I was listening to a podcast about his work, and somebody said, according to critics, they didn't always like his movies, but they said that he didn't make the best movie you've ever seen, but he probably made your favorite movie. So I'm thinking that if I were sitting in an audience of you performing these great sort of Yiddish songs, but not Tumbala Laika, the ones that I don't know, right? I don't speak Yiddish. I don't know these tunes. In a lot of ways, it feels like, my experience of like Chazanut, it's cantorial music that's like really quote unquote operatic. And I know that this is from the past of my people. So there's a way in which like I relate to this, and yet it's not turning on my sentimentalism so much because I don't actually know this. I don't really understand it. And I'm wondering whether you could talk about from the perspective of the audience. In a way, it's the difference between popular music of various subgenres versus a kind of more, let's call it an artistic music. I mentioned this on an earlier episode in this series where I was talking to a friend who's a violinist, and she was talking about how she doesn't enjoy playing popular music, like movie music, because she says like it's fun music, but the bowing isn't very interesting, and it's not interesting to perform it. And I thought that was so interesting that the performer of music that I love is having kind of a negative experience, whereas the performer of music that maybe I have a hard time relating to is having a really positive experience. And how do we think about the relationship between the audience and the performer and the music itself? And maybe this is a way of saying Jews music and Jewish music. What should we be thinking about in terms of understanding that dynamic deeply?
This is a very hard question for me to answer because I listen to music, and I have listened to music almost as an amateur ethnomusicologist always. So there's always a quality of analysis involved in my act of listening to music. I'll be completely honest. Like if I go to say I have an engagement at a, suburban Reform temple in the Midwest, and I go to a Friday night service, the thing that I'm the most turned on by in attending the service is figuring out what melodies they're going to use for the service, and then trying to divine what those melodies mean to that particular group of people and why they made those decisions.
Big same.
That being the case, what's actually happening in the audience what it would be like for a generalized sense of an audience, like what their interactions are with the music, is a little mysterious to me. I think it's interesting that you discussed your experience with operatic music in some way being compromised by knowing exactly what they were singing. Because I think what that identifies is that music works on any number of different levels. It works on an emotional level, it works on a rhythmic level, it works on a communicative level. And that communicative level could be through the words, but it can also be through just the music itself and the way in which that music is performed and the context in which that music is performed. It's those things that people don't think about and maybe shouldn't have to think about when they're listening to music. I'm just curious, like, did you ever have like a comparable experience in relationship to being in synagogue and hearing somebody, davening Chazanut, davening like Ashkenazi Jewish cantorial music? Like, did you ever have like more of an emotional experience of what you were listening to and maybe not caught up so much in what the text was trying to convey to you ritualistically or spiritually?
Yeah, I think a little, but that's kind of part of what I'm wondering as people, like, if I had a experience like that, I imagine that it came in part from the fact that my father sometimes used to play records of cantors at home. And so like I was a little familiar with that music. And so therefore it was able to fire up a little of that nostalgia and that sense of connection. I'm wondering about a person, and here's where I think like the Yiddish art music that you're talking about, like I think there's probably pretty few people, at least of my age and younger, whose parents put on Yiddish art music when they were young. I mean, I think it's also very rare that they put on cantorial music, but my dad was a rabbi, and so, there was a little more likelihood of that. But I guess I'm wondering, like, I think it's so interesting that you were saying that you embody this yeshiva student from the late 19th century when you sing the song, like, you are that person. And that I totally understand. What I'm curious about is how the audience, without going through some kind of prep like you, I imagine, go through when you're going to perform, how does the audience be ready to receive that music in the way that you are offering it if they themselves don't have that experience of being that Jew from 100 years ago?
So I'm going to harken back to an earlier part of this conversation, which is in which I was trying to sort of address the importance of like the Jewish artist and their motivations, their desires as artists, and like how important that is in relationship to audiences. I do feel like I have an obligation as a performer of music in a language that most of my audience do not speak, but to which they have some sort of familiarity. Otherwise, like, why would they be there? Even though I do give concerts to people who haven't heard any Yiddish music before and have no familiarity with Yiddish. And I have an obligation to everybody in my audience to make sure that the music is beautiful, is emotionally engaged, and has aspects that they can connect to on a human level, regardless of the fact they might not understand what I am saying. I do have an obligation to make beautiful sounds. I have an obligation to the author of the words I am singing, an obligation to the composer of the music I am singing, and an obligation to the Jews whose lives are being depicted in the music that I am singing, to present their lives as meaningfully and even as beautifully as I possibly can in order to connect who they are and what they are with my audience, even if they do not understand what I am singing. To take this text and to perform it as meaningfully as possible as a way of connecting the people who are hearing me with the spiritual and metaphysical reality of what is happening in that music and happening in that text. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
For me, I don't get up and say, okay, now I'm performing cantorial music. And then, I step off to the other side of the stage and I say, now I'm performing Yiddish art song. To me, these are the same things, because in my performing it, I have a responsibility to Yiddishkeit, to Jewishness. I have a responsibility to what it is to be Jewish in the world, to perform these things in such a way that people get emotionally engaged, even aesthetically engaged. Aesthetics get a bad rap. I blame it on Instagram, but that's another conversation.
I think you're bringing up some really interesting points, and I want to dwell in language you've used multiple times about music as text. And my first reaction to when you said music is text, as somebody who loves text and as somebody who loves music, is music isn't a text. But it also is. Like, my first reaction was, I'm really interested in the specific, and by the way, people call our podcast a text. So, and I have a similar response, which is, there are things about what we do that I believe should be grouped in a broader genre with written words, but there's also a distinctiveness, a specificity to what can happen via spoken audio in conjunction with, music that we put in the background, in conjunction with editing, whatever set of features a podcast has. And I'm interested in the overlaps, and I'm also interested in the differences. And I want to ask you about this because you're somebody who works with the modality of delivered music via vocal performance, which, like, I'm not saying there isn't text involved. Like, there's written sheet music that people use to learn some music, maybe not all, but a lot of music. For me, the sheet music isn't the music, if that makes, like, the sheet music is the launching point into the music. And so the text is part of the story, but not the whole story. And I want to ask you, because you're a writer as well as being a performer of vocal music, and that means that you may have a window into what the overlap is, in what ways all of those things, written poetry, written novels, written whatever, and like delivered musical performance, like in what ways those are all text, those should all be understood as one thing. And also the degrees to which there is a uniqueness, a specificity to what we glean from written words versus what we glean from vocal performance. So that was a long ramble, but I guess I'm not really pushing back. I agree music is a text, but I think it's not only a text. And so I'd love to hear more about how you relate to the modality of written words and the modality of vocal performance. What's similar, what's different?
I mean, I only have myself to blame, right? I've brought you to this question, so now I have to answer it. Music and its relationship to text, especially, and I can only speak as far as like Yiddish art song is concerned, right? There are simultaneous things happening at the same time. You're receiving text, right, in its most conventional sense, words, and then you are hearing those words on the back of music, which has its own set of particularities, has its own set of references, is doing its own thing. It's illuminating the text. It's creating a deeper meaning within the text that perhaps the text did not have itself, or perhaps the music would not have without the text, right? The magic of vocal music is that these two things can happen at the same time. For me, a Jewish text is something that when you engage with it, you will have some sense of what it is to be Jewish in the world. And that's anyone who engages with a Jewish text has some sense of what it is to be Jewish in the world. And from that particular definition, yes, of course, music is a Jewish text, because by interacting with Jewish music, you are gaining some sense of what it is or what it has been to be Jewish in the world. You know, there's an entire conversation we could have just about wordless text coming from the Hasidic tradition of Central and Eastern Europe, and there being any number of meanings underneath these wordless texts, which are extremely intelligible to the people who sing them, the people who write them, and the people who perform them and pass them on. Obviously, for that community and beyond, Baruch Hashem, these are texts. They have names. Their melodies mean things. Like Nign Daled Bavos, right? The wordless melody of the four gates. That is quite a muscular name for something that has no words. So obviously it is working within space as a text. There is a meaning that each of those phrases has. What that meaning is something you can only figure out by having a relationship with it, by singing it, by hearing it in a community of people who are singing it together. This is like this is a Hasidic idea. Now I have to address text in its most conventional sense. It's very easy for me to talk about music as text. Talking about text as text. Text itself is a kind of music, right? Where like, here I am, I'm talking about music as text, but text is a kind of music as well. Words in relationship to each other create sounds, obviously, but a combination of words together create meaning. And that meaning can be interpreted in any number of different kinds of ways. And in that sense, it's exactly like music, because music also is something that is concrete and can be interpreted in any number of ways. About your question concerning like the similarities and the differences between music and text. Text is music that has not risen to the world of music yet, right? It is unset. It has not been set to music, but perhaps may become music in the future. Music is text in the sense that music is something that has not been written into yet, but may yet be turned into words that in some way embody what that music means. Like, to me, there's a complete relationship between music and text. And like, this is not like a high-flown foreign idea. I mean, you can go to a concert hall and, go to a performance of Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, right? And each movement of Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony is the depiction of a scene happening in a European forest. You sit there and you listen to the music, and you find in the music these like depictions of what it is to be in a forest, or what Beethoven thought it was to be in a forest in the beginning of the 19th century. And you hear birdsong, and you hear like horns, and you hear, trees shifting in the wind. The music itself is a text. It's building a world. Just because that's not happening in the most conventional sense as a text doesn't mean it is a text. Of course, it has happened in a conventional sense, like Beethoven and people after Beethoven said, oh, this is the Pastoral Symphony. Here's what's happening in this movement. Okay, in this measure, you can hear birds. And then that text becomes even more realized in something like, say, Fantasia, where like, that movie takes the musical expression of this text and then makes it concrete by having animated images that suddenly show you exactly what's happening in the forest at that particular point in the music. Text is always lying underneath music, and music is always lying underneath text.
You're helping me understand something about myself, and I hope this is true for our listeners too. What I think you and I share, I know you and I share, is we love music, and we think music is really important in the world. What's interesting for me, I'm noticing about myself, I was shaped musically, Davka specifically, learning by ear without text. I learned piano via Suzuki method, which is a particular methodology of learning music where you are steered away from sight reading music and you are specifically in your ear. And I think partially related to that, I loved that in synagogue, yes, there were prayer books, right? Like the words were there, but most people are not like even if you don't know all the words perfectly, like you're not really singing from the book. Like the music isn't in the book. When you go to most churches, there's a hymnal with particular melodies. I associate positively, not a text. My like warmest, fuzziest musical feelings emerge from not text. Subconsciously or consciously, I love music, and so I don't want it to be text. But you're shining a light on the ways that it totally is. But what I don't mean that music is not like. I think what I'm hearing from you is text refers to like sort of discrete source with a depth of meaning. When you talk about that wordless melody, when you talk about that nigun as being a text, as having this elevated name for something that's wordless. I actually once, I had people over for a Kabbalat Shabbat service, and I put on my source sheet in Hebrew and in transliteration, yai, nai, 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 nai. Like I wrote out those things, and everybody was like, it took them a second because they looked at, wait, Lex, you put the words on paper? And part of my point was like, it feels silly when we have those syllables written down on paper, because the whole point is that it's not that. All of this is sort of me realizing this in real time, that I have a trigger around music being, for me, and I know you don't mean this, just a text. But help push back, because I think you're not wrong on this. Like, I just have whatever, like, help me salvage how beautiful it is that music is text in a world that often loves to talk about how, you know, we spread melodies orally, it's not all in the book, etc., as what makes Jewish music meaningful.
I don't know if I can necessarily do that because I'm right with you, Lex. I will tell you my experience assimilating and internalizing and then performing music in kind of the Yiddish art song tradition initially was very text bound, right? I had to learn these songs via sheet music, via a collection of music, and specifically art song, which of music that one finds in Yiddish is really tied to a very textual tradition. It is not merely the words in Yiddish on a sheet and the melody and some guitar chords. It's literally through composed, like a piece of classical music. It is a piano and vocal score. It's not an accident that I ended up performing Yiddish art song, or that it kind of called out to me, because it was the thing that was the most intelligible to me, having come from a conventional classical vocal background. What my responsibility has been to this music is to learn it as quickly as possible from that sheet music, and then take the sheet music and put it back into the folder and put the folder in a closet and figure out actually what is the relationship between this music and the palpable reality, traditions, sounds that exist outside of the book. What is the reality of this song outside of the confines of this book? Oftentimes when I perform, I don't perform with sheet music. I perform with just the words. I have a responsibility to the music to have the music reside inside of myself, not on the sheet, and to convey it to my audience that way. So I totally understand where you're coming from, because I don't like the kind of fixity of having those things on the page and having to refer to the page. Like those things are a reflection of something that exists within the world. My obligation is to return it back to the world by internalizing it and then performing it for my audiences.
This is it's affirming. I'm glad we're right there with each other on this. And by the way, to listeners, if you really love music as text, even in the sheet music sense, like, let us know, and that's great too. But like, I guess my closing question is like channeling this outward, including the conversation of Jewish music. But I think what you just said, it's easier to understand in the realm of music than in other realms of Jewish text. I would say just as strongly, and I think for our organization and for our listeners, like, we have you said we have a responsibility, or you said you, because you're the performer, but like, you have a responsibility to have the music dwell within you. I'm speaking in like sing-song yeshiva voice. Mm-hmm. Dwell within you, but not in the page, not in the sheet music. In many ways, that is a distillation of what I believe our work as Judaism Unbound is, but not just about music. We have a set of people in the world who have been taught that Judaism lives in texts and books and holidays and rituals that are, yes, we're in relationship to them. We receive them from our past or our ancestors or our whatever. But I think we've been taught that they exist sort of separable from us. What we do is we read them or we deliver them, as opposed to like our responsibility with Torah or with a holiday or with whatever Jewish, I'm going to say text because I don't have a better word, but like whatever Jewish source or ritual we're working with, is to do what you just said. We have a responsibility to have it dwell within us so that we can then bring the beautiful embellishments that are comparable to somebody performing vocally, like bringing their spin on it. Like, I see that not only as like, oh, it's nice when we can do that. Like, people can be literate with Judaism, and then like the experts, maybe they can do those Jewish embellishments. I see it as like the core of the enterprise. How might we channel what you're bringing outward into a conversation that includes Jewish music, but also relates to how we practice our Judaism more generally.
I love all of this. This is like, it's such an amazingly sort of affirming thing that you've just said. I'm going to get very rabbinical in the name of my husband, Rabbi Michael Rothbaum. The Torah does not reside in heaven. The Torah resides on earth where we are. It is something that exists in us and through us. It's funny that we've gotten to a very like religious conversation in the context of talking about this, because I think oftentimes people don't consider like there to be really any religious context and relationship to culture that happens in the Yiddish language for various reasons. I mean, there have been people who have articulated themselves in the Yiddish language historically who wanted to have nothing to do with religion whatsoever. So, I mean, that is one identity within Yiddish language and culture. But a lot of those people were coming out of identities that were extremely religious in their context and the way that they did everything. So there's like this unusual sort of relationship these two things have with each other. Just going to put that off to the side. I'm trying to remember, like somewhere in the Torah, there's the assertion that Israel is like a nation of priests, right? That each person in a Jewish space has the potential to be the one who is creating spiritual connection with the divine. My fondest wish, you know, the thing where if it ever actually happens, for me, it will be Moshiach Tzeit. It will be the coming of Moshiach.
A messianic
yes,
era.
yes. Is that considering the people of Israel to be a nation of priests also means that they're a nation of performers, that everybody has some access to the experience that I have as a performer of connecting with spirituality, with text, with history, with meaning, both personal and the meaning of a kind of peoplehood. I hope everybody has that experience. I want everyone to have that experience. I don't want that experience to just be my own. I want everybody to feel as moved by their interactions with Jewish music and text as I do. I want everybody to be on the verge of tears when they're davening, you know, for example, Va'ani Tefilati. I have it as, and as for me, my prayers to you, God, at this time of favor, God, with great compassion, answer me with your salvation. This is like a very sort of simple, but also very intimate expression of Jewish spirituality, the relationship of the Jew to the divine, right? But there's something about this text, and specifically for me, the setting of this text by Israel Goldfarb. He wrote some tunes everybody knows. Correct. Like Shalom Aleichem, the one that supposedly sounds like it comes from the old country. It doesn't come from the old country. It comes from this country in the first half of the 20th century. So the Goldfarb setting of Va'ani Tefilati is just so moving to me because it takes this sentiment, you know, and as for me, my prayers to you, God, at this time of favor. The melody really outlines what the words are supposed to do in relationship to God, who is supposedly listening to this at this very important part of the service during Torah service on a holiday. As a performer, I take a phrase like that, and as for me, and I really think about it being me, just me. But the idea is that when we pray these words, we're actually praying it as a congregation. And this is the exact same sort of relationship, I think, that I have in mind when I'm saying, like, I wish everyone was a performer like I was a performer. Everybody should be able to get up and have an immediate emotional and spiritual relationship with what it is that they're creating, you know, through song and through text. I think what I like about this text is that it's very personal, but it's happening in public, right? It's happening in a congregation, right? This idea of like a nation of priests, the function of a priest, I think, especially biblically, can be very alienating. You know, you're separated from the community. You're kind of not a part of the rest of Israel. You have a very discrete function in relationship to the ritual purity and various things that you have to do on behalf of the entire community. So what does it mean to have an entire congregation full of people who have this function? All of this is to say that Jewish music presents a real opportunity for people to figure out how to emotionally engage not only with what it is to be Jewish, but what it is to be Jewish and embody and connect with things that are so much larger than the individual. History, language, culture, pain, transcendence. Jewish music always presents the opportunity to be able to connect deeply, both as a performer, but also as somebody in an audience. I'm just so grateful that I've been given the opportunity to be able to engage with this, and also the ability to be able to engage with the people who are the most moved by this. It feels like a gift.
Thank you so much, Anthony Russell, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about all of these things. It's not often that I get an opportunity to talk about all of these things. Everything that we've discussed is always happening kind of in the background of what I'm doing and what I'm thinking as I'm performing. And people just kind of get the experience of that through my performance. So to have the opportunity to really talk about these things with you is really meaningful. I really want to thank you guys.
That is really beautiful to hear. It was meaningful for us as well, and we hope that this episode was meaningful for all of you out there listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. As we close, a quick reminder that we have 3-week mini courses in the Anya Shiva beginning very, very soon. The first of them begins on January 12th. You gotta head to judaismunbound.com/classes. That's where you sign up. There's learning and unlearning to do on the topic of the Torah of kink, Hasidism and Neo-Hasidism, Brit Milah Unbound, that's learning about circumcision and alternatives to circumcision, and Queering Kedusha on holiness through the lens of Jewish craftways. So again, judaismunbound.com/classes. If you're interested in those, there is financial aid available for any and all of those classes. Head to our website to learn more. As we close, we also hope that you'll be in touch with us with any questions, ideas, visions you have about the Jewish future, about what Jewish music is as we close out this unit. Whatever you've got, you can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook and Instagram handles. Both of those are at Judaism Unbound. There's our website, judaismunbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and lots of other juicy goodies. And you can email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.